Good morning. We're on Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, 13b at the bottom in the Mishnah. Akara Sha'amru. This that we said that you need a cross beam, and at the beginning of the alleyway, at the beginning of your mavui, that beam across Kedei L'Kabel Ariach has to be strong enough that you could put a half brick on it. So there are different size bricks, and a general brick was 3 tefachim wide, and a half brick was 1.5 tefach wide. So it has to be strong enough to receive that you could put this brick on it, and the cross beam can survive. And a riach is half of a brick, shel shloshet tefachim, of 3 tefachim, so 1.5 tefach. And therefore, it is sufficient to only have for the beam to be 1 tefach wide. So if the cross beam is 1 tefach wide, so then a 1.5 tefach brick can sit on it. As the Gemara is going to explain, you'd have a 1/4 tefach stick out on either side, and cement that to the wood, and that would be a way that it can hold a brick of 1.5 tefach wide. Now l'rachbay, that would be to the width of the brick to the length of the width of the crossbeam. So that's really la'arkei rechava kedei l'kabel ariach. It's wide enough to be able to receive this brick. Uberia kedei l'kabel ariach, and it also has to be strong. So it has to have both aspects, wide enough and strong enough that you can put a brick on it. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we're only talking about it in the width, that it would theoretically be able to receive a brick, but it doesn't have to actually be strong enough. And therefore, he says, therefore, he says, even if it was made of straw or of reeds, which are weak, and you put a brick on it, it'll break, it's too brittle, nevertheless, it'll be valid because it is wide enough to have this, to receive a brick on it. And therefore, he says, we just look at it as if it was metal. Were it metal, would it be wide enough to be able to receive this brick or not? Akuma. What happens if it is bent or twisted out of shape? It's not a straight across beam. So we look at it as if it is straight. Agula, if it is a round, rather than being flat at the top that you can put a brick on it, it's still a log. It's rounded, and so therefore you cannot put a brick on it. But nevertheless, it has the width enough for that. So right now it's kili merubas. We see it as if it is squared. So this is a crude pie. As long as it has 3 tefachim in its circumference, it'll have a tefach in its width. Now we go to Yudalid Amid Aleph, right at the beginning of 14a. The Gemara challenges, why is a tefach wide enough? Tefach hamechzabai, it should require 1.5 tefach because that's the width of a brick. And it says, no, keep on the rachav l'kabel tefach. Since it is wide enough to 1 tefach to receive the brick on it, either chatzi tefach, the other half tefach of the brick, will be a 1/4 tefach on either side, which is about 1 inch or less. So malbin lebetina, and that would be cemented with some cement, mashu mahagis, a little on this side, a little on that side, the kayema, and then it would be able to stand. And that's why 1 tefach is sufficient for the crossbeam, because it can receive a brick that's 1.5. Amar Rabba bar Avuna, Kara Sham Ratzichas Teberia Kedei L'Kabel Ariach, Amida Kara Ein Tzrichas Sheberin Kedei L'Kabel Ariach, Kara Bariach. even though we say that the beam itself, the cross beam, has to be strong enough that a brick can go on it, but you don't actually have to put the brick on the cross beam, and therefore the supports for the cross beam, whatever is supporting that cross beam, doesn't have to be strong enough to hold the beam plus the brick. It only has to, because you're only putting the beam on it, and it has to be strong enough to hold the beam. It doesn't have to have the supports don't have to be strong enough to hold a brick as well. The beam, in order for it to be a valid beam, in theory has to be able to hold a brick, but you don't actually have to put a brick on it, and therefore the supports don't have to be able to support a brick. However, well, just as the cross beam must be strong enough that a brick can be placed on it, so too the supports of the beam also have to be strong enough to hold not only the beam, which they are holding, but also a brick on top of that. Amar Sheshes, hiniach kar al gabi mavui uparas ala machzelas. And if in protecting this protecting this cross beam, they put out a reed mat in order to protect it. It's raining and it's wood, and you don't want it to disintegrate or get damaged, and so they put a mat over it, and now this mat is hanging down on the side. So now I have, instead of a visible cross beam, I now have an actual wall. But that wall doesn't work as a wall because it ends high up above the ground. So they put a mat over it, and that mat doesn't reach down to the ground within 3 tefachim, say 9 inches from the ground. So then it doesn't count as a wall because it's off the ground. It's a mechitza teluya. It's a hanging wall, which we saw earlier only works for water. So kara inkan, I don't have the cross beam because it's not visible and it's not acting as its own wall. And mechitza inkan, and I don't have a proper barrier either. The reed mat doesn't act as a wall either. So even though I have a cross beam, but it's not visible and can't act as its own wall because it has a virtual wall, because it has a literal wall there, and it can't work as a reminder at the end because I can't even see it, and the wall itself is an invalid wall because it doesn't reach the ground. So mechitza inkan and kara inkan. Kara inkan the hamichasya. I don't have a cross beam because it's covered. Mechitza inkan, and I don't have the wall itself. If young goats can walk through beneath the wall, then it's not a valid wall. And we'll see this. This is a 3 tefachim minimum. That it's a maximum actually. The max space that a wall can have gap from the bottom of the wall to the ground is 3 tefachim. Below that is a mechitza shegedim that goats would get out underneath, and therefore it doesn't count as a valid wall.
Isn't there something called yored v'soisim? What is that?
P tikra yored v'soisim. Correct. That's where we have a the side of the beam, a valid side of a wall can also come down. That's going to be where you. That's what I was saying. You can that would only be true if you don't have an actual wall. But if you have an actual wall, the wall itself must reach within 3 tefachim of the ground. Tana Rabbana. If the cross beam, the korah, is too short, and it doesn't reach the other side of the alleyway. It is long enough that it reaches most of the way, but not to the other wall. And it either has a support at the other side, their counterbalance is strong enough to hold it in place. Whatever it is essentially a freestanding crossbeam that is supported on one side of the alleyway and runs across the front of the alleyway, but doesn't reach the other side. Similarly, or you have two beams, and they if the alleyway, let's say, is 10 amas wide, each one is 4.5 or so, and they come across but don't actually touch. So if the gap is less than 3 tefachim, we saw this concept several times already, that there is a concept of lavud, that where you have a gap of less than 3 tefachim, halachically that gap is closed off by whatever barrier, by whatever substance you have near it. So a gap of less than 3 tefachim does not count. And therefore you don't have to bring a new beam, a replacement beam. Shloisha, however, if the gap is 3 or more, then you do require another beam. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, however, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Pachas midaled in tzarich lavi kara acheres, arba tzarich lavi kara acheres. He says that lavud is 4 tefachim, not 3 tefachim, and therefore he says you have up to 4 tefachim missing and of a gap, and it'll still count because the lavud, the concept of it being closed off, it would be up to 4 tefachim. Generally, the halacha is that it would require a lavud is less than 3, but Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds lavud is less than 4. V'chein beis kuras hamatimas lebezu kadei lekabel hariach v'lebezu kadei lekabel hariach. If you have 2 beams, each one alone is not strong enough to hold this brick that the Mishnah talks about. However, 2 of them together are strong enough to do so. So you had a 2x2 running across. It's not strong enough, but if you have 2 of them side by side, that would count. That would be strong enough to hold this brick. If the width is now a tefach and it's strong enough that combined the 2 of them sitting side by side to hold a brick, that's fine. And therefore you don't need to bring another crossbeam. However, and if not, you would be required to bring another beam. However, Shimon Gamliel says that it would be to its width and not to its length, and in order to hold the crossbeam, the brick. So we have these 2 beams. Again, either one of them is not strong enough to hold this brick. However, if they were side by side, they'd be strong enough. But the supports for the beams are not aligned, and therefore one is lower than the other. So they're not actually near each other, but rather one is lower and one is higher. So Rabbi Yosef then we see them as if they were side by side, the lower one higher up or the higher one lower down, and then they would be sufficiently strong to support a brick, then it's going to be okay. However, there is a maximum to this. The one that's higher cannot be above 20 amma. As we've seen from the start, that 20 amma, let's say 30 feet, is the maximum height of your alleyway crossbeam. And so even though that one of them is within that 20 amma max, but if the other one is above, we can't count it as a combining support for this brick, or for theoretical brick, because it actually is too high. It doesn't count as an alleyway crossbeam. Similarly, similarly, the lower one can't be within 10 tefachim of the ground, let's say 30 inches. Because if it is within 10 tefachim of the ground, so it as well would not count as a valid crossbeam for the opening of the alleyway, as we've seen that's the minimum height that it can be. And so even though the one higher up is within the space that is a valid crossbeam for the alleyway, but since the second one is below and the one that is within the proper space is not strong enough to hold a brick by itself, it needs the next one, and the next one is not in the correct spaces, it doesn't count, so therefore it would be invalid. Amar Abaye Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Savar Lo Kavu B'Chada Upalig Elei B'Chada Savar Lo Kavu B'Chada Upalig Elei B'Chada. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, agrees to his father in one manner and disagrees in another. Savar Lo Kavu B'Chada the Islay Roy. He says that we don't have to actually have a crossbeam strong enough to hold the brick. It's sufficient that it is the size that can hold a brick. But he disagrees with him in one manner, because his father, as we saw in the Mishnah, says that 20 is not the maximum height. It can go even higher than 20. That the crossbeam can even be higher than 20. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda and his son, Rabbi Yossi, he follows the majority opinion that max height is 20, and therefore he says, if the second beam, which would complete it to the width of a tefach, is above 20 amas, it's going to be invalid. Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't have to be strong enough to hold the crossbeam. It just has to be wide enough, and this brick idea is just there to tell you the minimum width of this crossbeam, that it has to be one tefach. Let's say 3 inches. So a 2x4 is going to be strong enough. Rav Yehuda taught to Rav's son Chia in front of Rav this halacha. That it needs to be wide enough to hold a brick, but it doesn't actually have to be strong enough. Amalei asne rechavo bria. No, don't teach that opinion. Teach the opinion that it has to be strong enough as well as wide enough. And Rav says, but Rabbi Lai said in the name of Rav, rechava arba'a, that if it is 4 tefachim wide, so it's a plank. It's not just a 2x4 beam, but it's actually a 4 tefachim, it's a 12-inch wide plank. That it doesn't have to be strong enough to hold a brick. It says, well, that's different. Once it's 4 tefachim wide, that is enough of a covering of the front of the alleyway that it doesn't have to be strong enough. When do we say that it has to be strong? When it's less than 4 tefachim. There, it has to, in order for it to be noticeable and clear that this is the demarcation of the opening of the alleyway, it needs to be at minimum a tefach wide, and Rav is saying there too, it also has to, there not only does it have to be wide, it has to be strong enough also to hold a brick. It has to actually be a solid piece. Whereas if it is 4 tefachim wide, it's sort of 12 inches. That's enough of a covering of the opening, and that would be visible enough and noticeable enough that it doesn't have to be actually strong material. Ha'isa shel kash. And the Mishnah said, after it says that it doesn't have to be strong, it just has to be wide, it says even if it's made out of straw or reeds. So Micah Mashmalan, what addition is that? We already said that we see it as if it's strong enough, because what we're looking for is that it's wide enough to hold a brick. So why do I have to tell you even out of reeds? Perhaps it has to be the type of thing, wood, that can hold a brick, and wide enough to hold a brick, even if it's not strong enough. Maybe this is already a diminished piece of wood. But it has to at least be that. But straw and reeds, which is a different material, different substance, perhaps it's never really able to hold a brick, and therefore it wouldn't be valid when it's so weak. Kamashmal, that's what the Mishnah says. It's not only that it has to look like it could, it actually, it's not only wide enough, but it doesn't have to be actually strong enough. It also can be noticeably not strong enough. It could be a different material, and it'll still be okay. The Mishnah further said, if the beam itself is out of shape, it's bent, it is twisted in some way, so it'll count as, we'll look at it as if it were straight, and if there's a tefach there, if it were straight, then it would be sufficient. So pshita, that too seems obvious. If you say that it doesn't have to be that it can support a brick, so who cares whether it's bent or not? So it's teaching us the teaching of Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said, "He it's bent so much, and you have the beam right at the opening of the alleyway, and then the bend, the warp in that piece of wood is such that it bends out of the mavoi. It is no longer above the alleyway itself. Or you have the wall of the wall of the mavoi 20 amas high, or 19.9, and then you have the cross beam directly on that. So it's within 20. However, the warp or the bend in this beam goes above 20. So while the ends which are sitting on the wall are within 20 amma, but the center which bends, which arches up, is above 20 amma. Or the minimum height is 10 tefachim, and this cross beam indeed is sitting on a wall of 10 tefachim, so it's fine. But then it bends, it dips down, it warps and sags down into the 10 tefachim. So in all these cases, even though that the ends are within the correct space, the warp, the bend, is outside of the correct space. So then we're going to say like this: okay, how much of it is out of the correct space? Again, maximum height is 20, minimum height is 10 tefachim, and it arches either above or down below or out in front of the alleyway. So we say, okay, let's make an imaginary line at the edge of where it's valid, and then we look how much of it is bent out of space, out of the halachic correct dimensions. Is it 1 tefach width? That's fine. 2 tefach width? Fine. 3 tefachim? That's where you're going to end. That's going to be too much. So, if you would take away, you would make a virtual line and remove that part of the beam that's bent out of the correct space. And your gap in the wood from one part to the next would be less than 3 tefachim. So it's going to be valid because you have lavud here. That's the concept of where you have two solids, and the gap between them is less than 3 tefachim. As we mentioned before, it's as if it's closed off. Bim lav. However, if the gap is going to be 3 tefachim or larger, now you're going to need to bring a new beam. That's going to be invalid. Anami pshita. That seems pretty obvious. No, I needed it for below, where it's above 20 and below 20. That seems obvious because it's not in the correct space. But where it bends out into the front of the alleyway, that's where I needed this. I may have thought maybe even though that the bend is less than 3 tefachim gap, and therefore you have a lavud. It counts as if it's virtually enclosed, virtually sealed. Fine. But since the beam is supposed to be the border, the end of where I'm supposed to carry, and this one warps out into the open space, maybe somebody's going to follow and carry you till that space. Kamash Malan, you don't have to be worried about that. That's what the Mishnah is saying. It's okay. Since virtually it closes off with lavud, this warp is less than 3 tefachim. It's okay to have it there as your crossbeam. The Gemara now is going to get into figuring out pi as a 3-to-1. Agula, merubas. If it was a log, so it was circular, and it wasn't just a flat piece of wood, so therefore you can't really put a brick on it. But I need to know that it has at least a tefach width. So how do I figure that out? So we said that we see that it would, even though it doesn't have to actually have a brick on it, it has to be strong enough and wide enough. It has to be wide enough that it can hold a brick, which is, if it's a circumference of 3, you'll have the width of 1. Coming to teach us, if you have a 3 circumference, you're going to have the width of a tefach. How do we know that that's the calculation? So Rabbi Yochanan said we learn it from Shlomo Melech's pool. Shlomo's Yam Sha'asa Shlomo, the pool that he made, was 5 amos high, and it was 10 by 10, and part of it was squared, and then part of it was made rounded. It was circular over a circular top of the pool over a square bottom of the pool, and it was 10 by 10 in the width and length, and the circle was 30 amma. Vayasas hayam mutzak eser ba'ama. It was structured 10 amma misfasa atzafasa ogul saviv. It was from 10 amma from one end to the other, and it was rounded at the top. Chamesh bama kamas. It was a total of 5 amma high. V'kap shlosh bama yusuf was, and it was a line of 30 amma was its went around it. Saviv vaikas fase. Well, that can't be, because if you say saviv around it, then it would be larger because you also have the ledge itself. It was a very thin. The circular top, which of the pool, was a thin piece of material. That even though the thickness of the wall was 1 tefach, it came to a very narrow, thin point, like a flower's leaf, like a petal. Bas Yachil, which would contain that. Vayika Mashu. And where it says, well, there's still a little more than the 3, so it should be larger than 30. It says no. The line on the inside was what counted, which was 3. So the 10 amma across on the on each side of the lower part, which was square, equaled a 30 on the inside of the rim on the upper circular part. Mika chashiv Tani Rabbi Chia Yam Shas. Megavoy chashiv. It was counted on the inside. Tani Rabbi Chia Yam Shas Shloim Machzik Mei v'chamisha mikveh dara. So Rabbi Chia taught that the pool that Shlomo made actually could contain 150 measures of a kosher mikveh. Mechti. Let's analyze. Mikveh kama havar b'im sa. A mikveh requirement is minimally 40 seh, which is the size of a mikveh, which is based upon, as the Gemara is going to tell us, one amma by 1 amma by 3 ammas. which is a 3 square cube amma, 3 cubic amma. Kedetani, we learned Barochatz b'mayim is kol that he has to wash his entire body in water, and we saw that may mikvah kol b'sari. So mayim shekol gufay olabeh. This waters that it has to be in a mikvah that it can envelop an entire body means that it has to be enough water to cover that the whole body can go into there. Now on 14b. Yudalit Amud Beis. V'kamahain, and how much, and how do I measure that? How do I assess how much that is? Amalama b'reib shalosh amas. That is a 1 amma by 1 amma by 3 amma. So 3 cubic amma. V'shira chachamim mei mikvah b'im seh. And to that measure, chachamim got 40 seh. Kama havilu chamesh mea garmidi. So if it's 5 high by 10 by 10, so that's 500 cubic amma. So l'tlas mea. So how much is that? So the 300. So the 3 tefach is 3 amma high. That's the size of a mikvah. So that gives you 300. L'tlas mea lamea. So there you have the mea. You have 100 mikvahs for the 300 cubic feet, which is the first 3 amas high of the mikvah. That gives you 100 mikvahs because that's 1 by 1 by 3 high. Lamei v'chamishin. But for the other 150, the chamishin, you're going to have 50 amas. So that's 150. And when it says, yeah, but you're still missing 50. Arba mei v'chamishin sagi. So that's just 150 more. That's 450 mikvahs. 450 square cubic amma. What happened to the other 50 cubic amma? That's because that would be if it was squared at the top. But the mikvah that Shlomo made was actually circular on top. So since you had 10 by 10 in the lower section, and you had that circular part at the upper section, and therefore you would lose a quarter of the upper section. Mechti. Kama maruba yaser ala agul. How much is a full square over this a circular area that fits in it? Ravia. It's a quarter more. So you'll be losing a quarter in that upper part, which is only circular. L'arba mea, l'arba mea, mea eser mechamisha. How do we read that?
For 400, it's 100, and for 100, it's 25.
I understand, but what's the 400 is 100?
L'arba mea.
I understand. What is that 400? 1 second. Oh, for the total, as if for the entire thing, right? Since you would have 500, it's 500. It's 500. It's 500 cubic amma. So you would have. For the 400 cubic amma, you'd lose 100, and lamea, for the next 100 cubic amma, eser machamisha, you lose 120. So it's a total that you lose 125. Hani me'av eser machamisha havalu. That would be 125 less, and you only have 50 less. So what's going on? So Tani Rama v'Yecheskel Yam Shasa Shloima Shlosh Meis Shlosh Amas Tachtonius Merubas. The lower 3 amma were square. So there you have a full 300 cubic amma that were 10 by 10 square, and so there you have a full 100 mikvah. It's only the upper 2 amma of this pool that were circular agulas. So there you have, in the upper two, you would have 200 cubic amma, and you take away a quarter, which is 50. And you cannot say that it was the other way around, that the circular part was at the bottom and the square at the top, because it clearly says its edge was circular. So that we know. Ella Emachada. Maybe it was only one amma that was circular at the top. That can be the siv alpayim bas yachel, because it says that it contained a bas, the 2,000 bas. So what is that? So bas kama hava shalish sayin. That's 3 sa. The siv masar bas minakur, like it says a 10. This measure of bas as a tithe from a kur, which is 6,000 measures. So the kur is 30 sale, and if the bas is a tenth of that, then it's 3 sale. And so that means that if you have 2,000 of these of this measure of 3 sa, that means you have 6,000 sale, which is 6,000 sale, and a mikvah is 40 sale. So that means it's 150 mikvah total, because we saw this measure of bas is 3 seah. It's a tenth of a kur, which is 30 seah, and a mikvah itself is 40 seah. And we said that the measure of Shlomo's mikvah is that it contained 2,000 bas, which is 3 seah. That's 6,000 seah. Divide 6,000 by 150. So that means if you divide 4,000, that's if you divide it by 40, because a 40 is a mikvah. So how many mikvahs are in this 6,000 seah pool? 40 seah mikvah. So 4 into 4,000 is 100, right? 40 into 4,000 is 100, and then another 200 into another 2,000 for the 6,000, from 4,000 to 6,000. That's another 50. That's half of it. So a mikvah, 40 seah would be 150 of them fit into Shlomo's mikvah. Amar Bayish, Mamina, Hai Gudshet Lasahavan. We see that the measure of this measure is 3. When it's dry, is 3, and that's why we say the bas is 3 seah. These chests, whether it's a chest, a drawer, a cylindrical basket made of reeds or straw, Ubar Safina, Alexandris, an Alexandrian boat pit, which was basically also a cylindrical basket. Even though they have a bottom, they can contain 40 seah in liquid, shehein kurayim b'yavish, which is 2 kur in dry. Taharin, they would be tahor, because we know that we've seen this in Shabbos and in Brachos, that in order for a vessel to count as something that is a vessel susceptible to tumah, it has to be something that is carried, is a movable vessel. A movable vessel, by definition, is something that does not contain 40 seah, does not contain the size of a mikvah, because then it's not netaltel molivarekan. It's not easy. You cannot carry it while it's full as well as while it's empty. And it's not going to count as a vessel. It's going to count as a stationary thing and not susceptible to tumah. In any case, these vessels at this size would not be susceptible to tumah. And what is that size? 40 seah in liquid, which is 2 kur, which is the amount that a person can pack in as in a pile of grain, which is double its width, double its height and its width and length, and that's the same as this pool. So we learn from here that the dry measure is 2 kur for the 40 seah liquid measure. In any case, related to what we have is that we learn from Shlomo from Shlomo's pool that where the 30 measure of was on the inside of that circular top, that it's 3-to-1 is pi. Tosas elsewhere over here, Tosas doesn't deal with it so much, but in Sukkah and in Psachim, Tosas deals with that pi is obviously more than 3, and where that little difference is. The Gemara itself deals with it a couple of times. Here the Gemara doesn't deal with that extra bit where it was. But obviously, as the Gemara says here at the beginning, since the measure was on the inner side of the circumference, which is always going to be less than the circumference itself, that's where that little bit is missing. L'chayayin sha'amru, goven asara tefachim, so we had, the previous Mishnah told us the minimum measure for the crossbeam. What about the lechi, the vertical post on the side? It has to be at least 10 tefachim high, which is, let's say, 30 inches. However, its width and its depth only has to be a minuscule amount. Technically, you can just paint on some plaster on the side, and that would 10 tefachim high, and that would count as a crossbeam. Sorry, that would count as a vertical post. However, Rabbi Yossi says, no, that would not suffice. You need a minimum of 3 tefachim. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah is going to be like Rabbi Eliezer, because it says you need 2 lechis. And in one of the Mishnayos, 2 Mishnayos ago, we had a machlokas between Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Eliezer, whether you need 1 vertical post and a crossbeam, either a vertical post or a crossbeam. And Rabbi Eliezer said you need 2 vertical posts, 1 on either side of the opening. And now our Mishnah says the l'chayayin sha'amru, the side posts, plural, that we said need to be this size, which indicates that you need 2 of them. So the Gemara says, no, we're not talking about in one alleyway. All of the lechis that we need, you need 1 per alleyway, but all of them need to be, and that's what it means in the plural. So why in the previous Mishnah, when it said kora, the crossbeam, it said in the singular, it should have said koros, plural, because we're talking about all the alleyways. My kora is kora thalma. So the Gemara says, it says, you're right, we're talking about 1 alley. But there were multiple opinions. One says that you need only 1. One says that you need multiple. That there has to be goven asarat tefachim or goven va'avian kolshu, that it needs to be 10 tefachim high. However, the width and breadth don't have a minimum. The kama kolshu. How little is this minimum amount? It says it's even like a sarbel, which is a type of garment. Even like the thread of that garment. Tani asa lechi lechatzi mavli, ein le elo chatzi mavli. All right, we'll leave this tomorrow at 8 o'clock. As from tomorrow, we'll see if you made the lechi not at the opening of the alleyway, but somewhere in